Hello, today we have a very special treat. We're going to get to examine one of the rarest physical culture exercise tools that I've certainly ever come across. It was invented in 1899, and if you look at magazines, physical culture magazines of that period, you may come across references to or advertisements for this device, describing it as this almost incredible thing, this mystical tool. You'll find statements describing it as, quote, the club with life in it, the new power, the beautiful force, nothing ever used or conceived like it, tremendous muscular force, endurance, energy, and alertness quickly acquired by the use of the force club, gives robust health, magnificent development, grace and celerity of movement. So this club was heavily advertised from between 1899 to 1900, and then it pretty much just disappears. So, as I've said, it's extremely rare, but we are very lucky because, as it so happens, a friend of mine named Todd Key, who is an expert juggler, a professional entertainer, and a longtime collector of rare physical culture, antiques and exercise apparatus, things like that, he has very generously sent me the club so that we could do a video about it. So I feel very lucky and privileged to be able to handle such a rare piece of physical culture history. Thank you again, Todd, and let's take a look at it. Just got a text that the package has arrived. Hopefully safe and sound.
Big box. Really carefully. Ooh, bubble wrap. Oh my gosh, look at this box. That's cool. It's huge. Oh my god. This thing is so much bigger than I thought it was gonna be.
So first off, this is an absolutely stunning device. It was described at the time as a beautiful piece of work, aluminum, nickel, and polished steel, and indeed it is. My wife, when she first saw it, remarked that it looked like the Tin Woodsman of exercise devices. And indeed, The Wizard of Oz, actually the first Wizard of Oz, meaning the book, came out the same year. So there may be a similar cultural aesthetic there. It has a bit of a early Art Deco feel to it, even though it's from the period of just before Art Deco. In that sense, I think that when this first came out, it probably looked a bit futuristic to people at the time. It's quite similar in shape to that of an Indian Club, which it was designed to emulate in some degree, which we'll see, but with one important difference. This handle, which is similar to that on a shovel, it was called actually a spade handle at the time, and as we're going to see, that significantly changes how you use it. And you do see this on some other pieces of the period. For instance, this club, which is called the Hercules Club, it's an adjustable type of a club. We'll do an actual separate video on that later. The Force Club, or Kallithenos Club as it was called at the time, was probably inspired or influenced to some degree by the Hercules Club. There were also dumbbells at the time, as you can see here, which had a similar type of a grip. Now about the name Kallithenos, or Force Club. Kallithenos is obviously a reference to Kallisthenos, the ancient Greek term for beauty plus strength. This club was invented by Albert Courtney of Buffalo, New York, as you see in the patent here. He built it as a, quote, new and useful improvement in Indian clubs. It was described at the time as, quote, a shell of solid aluminum with a small steel rod running from end to end. Weights of different sizes are made to slip over this with sections of the finest tempered steel, spiral springs, above and below them. The base of the club unscrews and is somewhat damaged, probably from many people doing so. The club then comes apart so that these cushioned weights could be removed or added to render the club lighter or heavier as desired. These weights also shifted and squeaked as the club was swung and jerked, supposedly imbuing it with life and made swinging, quote, like wrestling with a live thing. You can actually hear that you just give it a bit of a twist, you can hear those weights shifting inside. Up and down. We weighed the 3 removable weights and found that each weighed a slightly different amount. Altogether, with all the weights inside, the club weighs approximately 4.3 pounds. It did receive some celebrity endorsements of the time, one of them being Frank Aaron, a champion lightweight boxer. Interviewed in his gymnasium while swinging the club, Aaron stated, quote, "This is the greatest scheme I ever ran across in my life. It is a new kind of training club. I want to say about this club that I never was so pleased with anything like it in my life. It strengthens the muscles in your back, stomach, wrist, fingers, neck, legs, and abdomen. I can take off more flesh with it than I can by wrestling, and as the exertion is not so extreme, I feel much better. I am obliged to Mr. Courtney for recommending it." So how exactly was it intended to be used? Well, wonderfully, Todd has sent us copies of the user manual that originally came with the club. So from this you can get a pretty good idea of how it was intended to be used by the manufacturer. Now briefly, a little bit of a word about this so-called manual. In terms of pedagogy, it's, in my view, extremely lacking. So basically, the author gives you a few pieces of advice and some tips, or most of which are rather vague. Some examples being, quote, "Swing it in any convenient circle till you have the hang of it. Don't work to excess." Well, okay, but what does excess mean exactly? Don't forget that this is the Force Club, the club with life in it. Throw your energy into the exercise and keep everlastingly at it. Go at it right, and the time will come when you will lay it down, all its weights in their place, look at it and say, "I'm your master. I fought you to a finish, and now I can play with you." In the end, the author basically gives us a bunch of pictures, some of which have dotted lines, and doesn't really give you any specific directions, but just sort of tells you to follow the pictures. So, you know, I can see a lot of problems arising for beginners or people who are inexperienced who receive this thing, didn't have a teacher. However, on the flip side of that, I think one could also argue that Indian clubs were so incredibly popular at this time that maybe there was an assumption on the part of the manufacturer that people would just have that foundation already, that they'd be able to do something with this. And in fact, the author does say that a pommel grip is intended for athletes and experienced club swingers, because there actually was a pommel grip which you could get, which you could interchange with the shovel or spade handle. And that these more experienced athletes will, quote, "go at the exercise in their own way," whereas the shovel grip or spade handle, as he calls it, is intended for beginners. Now, regarding this shovel grip or spade handle, as the manufacturer called it, it does change the manner of use significantly of something like this compared to, say, an Indian club, or with the interchangeable pommel grip that existed also at the time. The main reason being there is no finger articulation whatsoever. You are locked into this grip, and that does change things significantly, because whereas with Indian clubs, part of the objective of that exercise was to look elegant and to look smooth, with this club, it's a lot harder to do that because all of the motion and articulation is coming from the shoulder and the upper arm. So you really can't do a lot of the dexterous and agile type of techniques and motions that you can with the Indian club. So why the shovel grip? Well, it's a bit easier in that it doesn't require you to develop that finger articulation and agility. So in that sense, for a mail order item like this with no live teacher to help you, that might have been a practical consideration. Also, since you're supposed to jerk or snap it towards you while you're in motion with certain types of the swings, the shovel grip does facilitate that. So with that, let's go and do some of these exercises. As the club is swung or tossed, the weights change their positions every instant, springing back and forth, impelled by their momentum and the action of the steel springs. This exercise is very similar to a common Indian club exercise, in which a forearm circle is combined with a back shoulder circle. So one of the things that is a challenge for The force club, and which makes it a little bit more dangerous compared to a normal Indian club, is that it's very easy in these motions for your hand to get caught and even trapped in the shovel handle, in which case you could severely injure your wrist or hand. In fact, I almost did so a couple times when I was first sort of trying to figure this out. So when you're doing motions like this, it's very easy for that to happen, and then suddenly you put a severe amount of torque and strain on your wrist. Whereas with a regular Indian club, like this 4-pound Peck and Snyder, you can open your hand. It's no big deal if the club slips or whatever. It's just going to fall out of your hand. You've got that open play in your hand.
The obvious difficulty of this exercise is maintaining the somewhat awkward stance required to execute the motion. In this exercise, the pectoral muscles are contracted. However, the greatest strain is on the forearms from attempting to maintain the club's horizontal position. This exercise strongly works both the bicep and tricep muscles of the upper arm. Utilizing a somewhat awkward grip, this exercise strongly works the extensor muscles on top of the forearm. Conversely, this exercise works the wrist flexors of the forearm. Although it may seem as though this should be easy, the extended weight of the club puts tremendous leverage and force on those muscles. In this exercise, both arms remain somewhat stationary in relation to the upper body. The twisting motion of this exercise works numerous muscles of the trunk, such as the oblique abdominal muscles, as well as some of the lower back. Again, here both arms remain somewhat stationary in relation to the upper body, and the exercise primarily works both the abdominal muscles and the lumbar muscles of the lower back.
So one of the other limitations of this grip is that a lot of these exercises show two hands within the shovel grip, and you really can't do that very well. If you do that, you're gripping over your own fingers. There's just not enough space in there to do that, so you can't really get a good grip with the overlapping hand. The other alternative is to have the branches of the grip going through your fingers like this, but then you're not using those outside fingers as much, and it's putting extra stress and tear on the skin of those 2 or 3 fingers that are able to make it inside.
This is yet another exercise made more complicated due to the restrictive nature of the shovel grip. It works both the bicep, tricep, and deltoid muscles, among others. again working the bicep, tricep, and forearm muscles. So one of the limitations about this shovel grip is that when you do the exercise that we showed just a moment ago, when you put the brakes on at this moment, as you're supposed to do, there's so much torque and weight, it really wants to turn in that grip. Now, you can squeeze really hard so that it barely turns in your grip, but at that point, it's actually ripping into your skin and your flesh a little bit. It's very uncomfortable. Whereas at the traditional Indian club, if you were to do that move, you've got a lot of leverage with this grip to put the brakes on. So some additional thoughts after having done those exercises. First off, after I was finished with them, my forearms were basically on fire. This uses a tremendous amount of forearm strength. The main reason for that is you really have to keep a crushing grip on this for certain types of the motions, especially the ones where you're not using the momentum of the club to keep it in motion, but you're just sort of static and just sort of raising the club like so, using the muscles of your forearm. So you do develop a lot of grip strength, but not with the same level of agility and finger articulation that you would get with an Indian club or with the interchangeable pommel grip that I mentioned before. Other than that, as I've said, it's a bit more limiting than an Indian club in terms of the type of motions that you can do. In my discussions with Todd, the owner of the club, about this, he expressed the opinion that a lot of the hype and marketing surrounding this club was probably just that. It was an invention that was attempting to cash in by improving something that really didn't need any improving at all, the original Indian club. And I would tend to agree with that. To me, it is a lot more limiting than an Indian club in terms of the types of motions and the range of motions that you can do with it. And I don't like the added danger of the hand getting trapped and possibly injuring you like that during the swings. Nevertheless, it probably had its place in the context of the time. There were certainly people during that time who extolled its virtues, like the boxer we mentioned earlier. And it's just a beautiful and unique piece of history, something that exploded on the physical culture seen at the time and then very quickly disappeared. In that way, I kind of look upon this as the equivalent of an Edsel or a DeLorean, as something that didn't ultimately catch on at the time, maybe for a very good reason, but that is a unique and fascinating artifact from history nonetheless. Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and have a great day.